Imagine a sun-drenched office in Los Angeles, 1933. The air smells of cigar smoke and expensive cologne. A man named Georg Gyssling is sitting there. He's the German consul, a representative of Adolf Hitler. And he's not just visiting. He's dictating edits to a major Hollywood script. He's telling studio executives to cut scenes, to soften dialogue, to ensure that the Nazi regime is never, ever offended. And the men across the desk? They aren't kicking him out. They're nodding. They're taking notes. They are calculating the exchange rate of the Reichsmark against their moral compass. Now, cut to February 2026. A studio in Florida or a basement in Texas. The glow of a ring light reflects in the eyes of a modern media mogul. They aren't meeting with a consul, they're staring at an analytics dashboard. They see that hate sells. They see that calling Israel a cult or defending the Iranian regime spikes the engagement graph. So they lean into the microphone and they say things that would have made Gyssling smile. The technology has changed, Jake, but the transaction, trading a soul for market share, remains exactly the same.
That is a terrifying juxtaposition, honestly. We are sitting here, it is February 28th, 2026. The news cycle is dominated by President Trump's launch of Operation Epic Fury. We are seeing strikes on missile sites, nuclear facilities, IRGC command centers in Iran. It is the most significant direct confrontation with the Ayatollah's regime in decades. And yet, if you scroll through what we used to call the conservative media landscape, you aren't seeing a rally around the flag. You aren't seeing even a nuanced debate about strategy. You are seeing a wall of noise that sounds suspiciously like a defense of Tehran. You're hearing about reckless escalation. You're hearing that the real enemy isn't the regime hanging protesters from cranes, but our own allies. It feels like we have lost the plot, but you're suggesting this isn't new. You're saying this is a rerun of a script written almost 100 years ago.
It is precisely a rerun. To understand why Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson are saying what they are saying today in 2026, you have to understand why Louis B. Mayer and Jack Warner did what they did in 1933. We have this nostalgic idea that Hollywood was always this bastion of anti-fascism, that they were fighting the good fight from day one. But the historical record, particularly the work done by Ben Urwand in his book, The Collaboration, Hollywood's Pact with Hitler, shatters that myth completely.
Shatters it how? Because we know they eventually made Casablanca. We know they made The Great Dictator.
Eventually is the operative word. For nearly a decade, the major studios didn't just look the other way, they actively collaborated. Urwand documents how studio executives invited Nazi officials, specifically Georg Gyssling, to preview films. This wasn't censorship after the fact, this was pre-production compliance. If Gyssling didn't like a portrayal of a German officer, the scene was cut. If he thought a film was too sympathetic to the Jews, the project was killed. There is the infamous case of a script called The Mad Dog of Europe. It was written in 1933 by Herman Mankiewicz. It was prescient. It would have exposed the persecution of Jewish families right at the start of Hitler's rise. But Gyssling issued a threat. If this film is made, all American films will be banned from Germany, and Hollywood folded. The script was shelved. They chose the German market's revenue, which Thomas Doherty notes in Hollywood and Hitler, 1933 to 1939, was about $1 to $2 million annually, over the truth.
1 to 2 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's significant, but is it enough to sell out your entire heritage? I mean, many of these studio heads were Jewish. That's the part that is hard to wrap your head around. They weren't just greedy, they were suicidal. They were feeding the alligator hoping it would eat them last.
Doherty calls it a failure of nerve, but Urwand goes further. He found archival evidence that MGM actually invested in German armaments production. Because of currency restrictions, they couldn't get their profits out of Germany easily, so they reinvested those profits into German industries, including those building the war machine that would eventually devastate Europe. That is the definition of a soulless compromise. They knew what Mein Kampf said. They knew what was happening, but they prioritized the business model.
And that is the bridge to today. Because we look at the 1930s and we say, how could they? But look at the reaction to Operation Epic Fury right now. You have a regime in Iran that has executed thousands of its own people, crushed the woman life freedom movement, and funded proxy wars that have killed Americans. President Trump finally says enough is enough, targets the military infrastructure, not the people, the infrastructure. And the reaction from this new isolationist right is to paint the United States and Israel as the villains.
It's the same mechanism. In the 30s, the incentive was the German box office. Today, the incentive is the algorithm, the audience capture. There is a segment of the online right that has become addicted to contrarianism and specifically to a repackaged form of anti-Semitism. Look at the data. The Jewish People Policy Institute released a study just a few months ago, late 2025, that tracked this shift. They found that 96% of Candace Owens' mentions of Israel were negative.
96%, that's not criticism, that's an obsession. And it's not just anti-Zionism, is it? The rhetoric has crossed a very specific line.
It's not even close to the line anymore. The line is a dot to them. In February 2025, Owens made this sharp turn. She started calling Israel a terrorist state and an occult nation. She referred to the Star of David as a cultic hexagram. She's revived tropes that would have been at home in 1930s Berlin, calling Jews Talmudic contract lords, claiming they controlled the slave trade, even suggesting they were behind JFK's assassination. In one video from 2025, she explicitly said they believe they have a right to own us.
That us versus them framing is classic dehumanization. But what's fascinating in a morbid way is how profitable this is. She has 5.7 million subscribers on YouTube. This isn't a fringe voice shouting from a street corner. This is a media empire built on the monetization of hate. And she's not alone. Tucker Carlson has followed a nearly identical trajectory.
Carlson's pivot is perhaps even more cynical because he positions it as America First realism. But in April 2025, he declared Israel is not our ally. He accused the Jewish state of running psychological operations on the U.S. The JPPI study showed 70% of his Israel mentions were negative, laden with dog whistles about financiers dragging America into war. He interviewed Daryl Cooper, a known Holocaust denier, and offered zero meaningful pushback. It mirrors the isolationists of the 1930s who said, "Why die for Danzig?" while ignoring the concentration camps.
And just like the Hollywood executives invested in German armaments, there's a financial entanglement here too. There are reports of Carlson's property plans in Qatar, his interviews with Qatari officials. You have to ask, who is funding this isolationism? Is it genuine concern for American blood and treasure? Or is it influenced by foreign interests that want to see the U.S. disengage so they can dominate their region?
That's the question we need to ask. When you look at Operation Epic Fury, the criticism isn't how do we ensure this is effective? The criticism is why are we fighting the enemies of civilization at all? These commentators are effectively providing air cover for the Ayatollahs. They ignore the women beaten for removing hijabs. They ignore the protesters hanged from cranes. They ignore the proxy bloodshed. Instead, they focus their fire on the one democracy in the region and the U.S. administration trying to stop the terror.
You mentioned the phrase soulless opportunism earlier. I want to drill down on that because Owens accused Charlie Kirk before his death in 2025 of refusing pro-Israel money. She tried to frame herself as the independent truth teller, unbought by Jewish money, which is, again, an ancient trope. But you're arguing that she is the one who has been bought, maybe not by a check, but by the dopamine hit of the mob.
It's projection, pure and simple. The soullessness comes from knowing better and doing it anyway, just like the Warner Brothers executives who edited Captured in 1933 to soften the depiction of German soldiers because Gyssling complained. They didn't do it because they loved Nazis. They did it because they loved revenue. Owens and Carlson are smart people. They know the history. They know what the Star of David represents. But they have found a market inefficiency. There is a hunger for validated anti-Semitism on the left and the alt-right, and they are rushing to fill that demand.
It's the horseshoe theory in action. You have the far left calling for the destruction of Israel, and now you have this mutated strain of the America First right joining them using the exact same vocabulary. Genocide, terrorist state, it's a convergence of hate.
And the cost of this convergence is paid in blood. That's the lesson of the 1930s. Hollywood's collaboration helped normalize the Nazi regime to the American public. It delayed the American entry into the war against fascism. It allowed the mad dog to run loose for years longer than it should have. By the time Pearl Harbor happened in 1941, millions were dead or doomed. Today, by demonizing the response to Iran, by painting Operation Epic Fury as the aggression rather than the defense, these influencers are buying time for a nuclear-armed theocracy.
Let's talk about that delay, because in the 30s, we had the Atlantic Ocean as a buffer. Today, in the era of ICBMs and cyber warfare and AI, we don't have that luxury. Trump's action, Epic Fury, seems to be a recognition that we cannot kick the can down the road anymore. But the media landscape is actively sabotaging that recognition.
That is the critical difference. In 1933, information traveled slowly. Today, a lie told by Tucker Carlson travels around the world instantly. When he says U.S. support for Israel weakens us against China or Russia, he is parroting a strategic falsehood that benefits Beijing and Moscow. The reality is that Iran is the linchpin of that anti-Western axis. Striking Iran, degrading their capacity to export terror, actually strengthens our position globally. But you won't hear that if your news diet is curated by algorithms designed to feed you rage bait about occult nations.
It's interesting you bring up the occult language again. It's so specific. It's not political criticism, it's theological demonization. It's trying to move the conflict from a geopolitical dispute to a spiritual war where the Jews are the villains in a cosmic drama. That feels like a very dangerous escalation in rhetoric.
It is the final stage of dehumanization. Once you convince your audience that the other side isn't just wrong, but evil, that they are contract lords or cultists, then any violence against them becomes justified. It's exactly what Hitler did with Mein Kampf. He didn't just say Jews were bad for the economy, he said they were a biological and spiritual threat to the Aryan race. Hollywood executives read that book. They knew, and they still invited Gyssling to lunch. Today, we watch the videos, we see the tweets, we know what Owens and Carlson are doing, and yet they are still invited to the table. They are still treated as legitimate political commentators.
So where does this end? The studios eventually had to pivot. Pearl Harbor forced their hand. Suddenly, Warner Brothers is making Confessions of a Nazi Spy. Do you think we are waiting for a Pearl Harbor moment with Iran? Or is Operation Epic Fury that moment, and half the country is just refusing to see it?
I fear Epic Fury is the moment, and we are failing the test of unity. The echo chambers are too deep. The profit motive for division is too high. Unless we can break this cycle, unless we can call out this soulless opportunism for what it is, we are going to sleepwalk into a catastrophe. The executives of the 1930s eventually had to confront what they enabled. They had to look at the newsreels of the camps and know that they helped keep the lights on in Berlin. I wonder if, 10 years from now, today's influencers will have the capacity for that kind of shame, or if they'll just pivot to the next grift.
That is the question that keeps me up at night. History teaches us that tolerating evil for gain leads to ruin. We saw it in the 30s. We are seeing the echoes of it right now in real time as the missiles fly and the pundits spin. We cannot afford to live under this menace, neither the external one from Tehran nor the internal one from those who profit from its defense.
Absolutely. The shadow of the 1930s is long, but we don't have to stand in it. We can choose to see the truth.
We have to. If you found this conversation valuable, if you think more people need to understand these parallels between 1933 and 2026, send this episode to a friend who needs to hear it.